Well, hi guys and girls, Emma again. Welcome back to another episode of this little traction engine build on Patreon. We're about ready to test the boiler, and first job really is to take all this apart. It's probably going to get painted and cleaned up before it goes back together again, but we need to get the boiler out of the machine. I'm going to go ahead and take everything apart and we'll see sort of how it looks. So this is all the bits. It's starting to look pretty good. We've made the smoke box and we've made the wheels. We did the front end. We did the axles. We made the brass boiler band. We've made the smoke box. The smoke box ends. We've made the engine frame and the engine plate there. We've made the pieces here for the piston and the cylinder, and a little knurled nut to hold it all together. We've got a crankshaft. We've got that smoke box bottom. We've got the ends of the smoke box, which I've already painted black. We've got a burner. So pretty impressed with all these bits sitting here. What we're going to do is pack them up and we're going to pressure test this boiler today. That's today's job, and then we can start cleaning bits up and putting them back together. So all this goes in the box. We'll put it aside for a bit and concentrate on this. We've got a nice clean bench. Everything's ready to go. First job is we need to make this so that the pipe doesn't so there's no leaks out the end of the pipe. That's a fairly easy job. A pair of pliers or just in the vise. I'm going to squeeze that up or even just hammer it down. We just need to squeeze that up there so it doesn't leak. That's that job done. We're going to test it through here. We've got a safety valve to set as well. So let's have a look at the boiler test equipment. This is my test rig, and I've been thinking for a long time to build a test rig. This was on eBay and it was cheap. It's not really ideally suited for testing these little boilers as it come off the shelf. It's just got a hose and it's got a gauge here that, if we have a look, goes up to about 900 psi, something like that. 5 megapascals. 60 bar, and that's a pretty crazy sort of a pressure. What I've done here is, we can see I've made a manifold and I've put the test unit out of the book. I've just used this, which was what I used for the last boiler I did from this book. Made a manifold. This has a little banjo that screws into the top of the boiler, just like this. with a fibre washer each end, and that's what puts the pressure in the boiler. It's also got a cap in here with a fibre washer on it, and that's threaded, and when we need to set the safety valve, that'll go in there too. I've actually put an elbow here, and this is a hot water system expansion control valve, which goes off at 120 kPa, which is about 160, 170 psi. So that means that this gauge, which if we look at it, goes to about 220 psi, or 1500, 1600 kPa, it's not going to get damaged by this pump, which is huge, pretty hefty pump. So first job, just going to lift our gauge there. So everything looks like it's probably going to work. We'll put this banjo back in here, and this all should support the boiler nicely. First job, of course, is to fill this up. And a syringe, or just run it under the tap with something in there to jiggle it to get the air out of it. Hold it down that way with a nice slight dribble, and it should fill right up to the top. You want it filled right to the top, so I'm going to go and fill that up. And we got just the tiniest dribble. We managed to get that full. I think it's pretty full of water. Another fibre washer on the bottom there to stop leaks. Now the purpose of this boiler testing, we probably should talk about that. It's not just being careful or because I'm putting this on YouTube or liability or anything else. The reason I'm doing this is to make sure the boiler's safe. If we put a fire in this and put it all together and paint everything up and then discover that you've got a solder leak, which happens, then you've got to pull everything apart and muck up all your paint and everything to do it. It's a convenience thing from that point of view. The other, probably the main reason is that we want to make sure that we can steam it and steam it confidently, and we're never ever going to know every time we fire it up. We're just not going to know how close it is to failing. And you don't really want a boiler like this with the end popped out of it. It's going to make a mess of your engine, and it's going to make a mess of your workshop. It's probably going to make a mess of you. There's a fair bit of energy in this little boiler at 30 psi. Having said that, the design is very sound. It's got to stay right through the middle of it. It's not a huge diameter. It's got lapped ends. It's all silver soldered. There's no reason at all why this boiler should fail. The miniature boiler code for this sort of boiler says 1.5 times working pressure, and I'm going to set working pressure at about 30 psi. That's probably way too much, or way more than it needs to be. And this engine will run pretty nicely at about 20, I reckon. We're going to set it at 30, and that way we don't empty the boiler with this safety valve every time it blows off. And we'll get a bit longer run. So everything should be ready to go. We're going to have leaks here everywhere, I'm sure. But that's 45 psi. Easy as that. We've got a little bit of a leak here because we didn't close this up particularly well. If we close this off here, then we've got a closed system here. So if this needle drops, it's because we've got a leak. This is dribbling a little bit. This is dribbling a little bit. This is probably dribbling a little bit. If we wanted to be really pedantic, we could solder this up. And that's dropped back down to about 25 psi because of those leaks. But all in all, our end joints are really sound. That one's dry as a bone. And a piece of paper towel here to dry this one off. And there's no moisture on this end either. Our fittings both look pretty good. Everything looks fantastic. I'm going to leave that. We've got quite a leak here. But everything else I'm really pleased at 50 psi. I'm really going to live with that. Really happy with that. It seems to be holding pretty comfortably. The only real pressure leak we've got is here. And if we hold our finger on there, well, then everything stops. There's no pressure drop there at all. So we're going to call that passed. Probably pretty happy with that. It's a nice idea to engrave or stamp into the frame at some point when it was passed and what pressure it was passed at. So I'm pretty well going to call that passed. That hasn't dropped off in pressure at all. And it's been, what, 15 minutes? Something like that. The next job is to set the pressure relief valve. And we'll do that with this fitting here. So I'm going to let the pressure out here, which is open this valve. And we'll screw this one out, which is just a plug. And screw our little pressure relief valve in and see where it pops. And there we go. It's popping about 50 psi, something like that. There we go, 50, it's maintaining about 50. I might just loosen that off a little bit. And probably you could make a little spanner for this to do it properly so you didn't mark it up. But in reality, once it's set, we're going to put a dab of paint on here so it doesn't move. It's about 50. About 48. So this is starting to unscrew right out, and I'd like it screwed and locked down nicely at the right pressure so you can't tighten it up anymore. It's about 25 psi there. So that gives us some idea of how much we need to cut off the spring. So we'll take this apart and we might do that next. There we go. A little spring there. Just going to cut one coil off it. And to be honest, probably not even one coil. I'm going to cut about half a coil off it to start with. Safety glasses when you're doing that. Put that back on. And we'll screw the top back in and we'll have another look at it and see how much difference that's made. not very much. It's about 40 psi. That's probably about 30 there. End up with a and that's pretty good, just flush there. Pretty happy with that. So I'm going to, probably the most effective way of stopping this is when we've got it set to the right thing. Give it a tap with a centre punch on the thread there. You can clean it out later with a little file or a scraper and get it out if you need to. And that stops the kids or the next owner from messing themselves up. And that's lock solid. Check him again. And that's popping there at about 30 psi, so pretty happy with that. I'll screw this out and put it away. A little dab of paint on there won't hurt it either. And then you can tell that it's been tested and you're pretty confident with it. But you can see that centre punch. You can see that centre punch mark in the top, and that's all it really needs. That'll stop everything from moving. So next job's to take all this off here, and we're going to call that boiler done. So we've got what I think is a pretty successful boiler test there. Pretty happy with that. There's a lot of little jobs to do on this, and I'm probably going to get some of them done before the next video. But first thing to do with this is to give it a good clean up with some steel wool and under the tap. Spend some time on it, get it shiny and bright, because it's not going back together nice. It's not. Once it goes back together, it may not come apart again. I think we still have to take it apart to... we need to take the engine off, I think, probably to solder this pipe onto the engine, but I'm not sure if it's got to come apart again or not. While we're at it, this could do with a polish up, and it wouldn't hurt to polish the burner as well. This smoke box is finished, so we could put some black paint on that, just matte black to match these. These could do with a sand up and another coat of paint too. Before we go to the trouble of painting all these bits and finishing off, I've given these a rub back. But there's a couple of little jobs. We need to drill through these holes in here for the canopy supports, if we're going to put a canopy on it. So, matter of holding all this together and putting it together and just drilling through the holes that are already in the supports, or in the back, the holes that are already in the back plates. Another job we need to do is put a hole in here, and that needs to be up 14 millimeters from this edge, and it needs to be a 4 millimeter hole. So that's a pretty easy job, just to mark the top of that and to mark it up. It's not super critical, but if it hasn't got a huge bend in this pipe out of the steam port and looks straight along the front, that's probably the important thing. And a fairly easy job to centre punch this and drill it, and we'll look at putting some paint on. So that's what that looks like. I try not to paint inside a cardboard box. I'd love to have a painting booth with a light in it, and a dust extraction fan. And I've seen them made nicely out of a big cardboard box. But cardboard box really isn't the answer. Giving these a good wipe over with some wax and grease remover, and then some mineral terps. And I've got a pad of butcher's paper, which I normally use for this sort of work. The secret to rattle can painting is to stir the paint enough. This doesn't have a stir time on it, but I try and go for probably 5-10 minutes. And then when we're done, just a light, when your paint's mixed, just a very light coat over the top. If you're painting with something like this, just be patient, is the answer. This stuff says touch dry after 16 hours, which is a pain in the neck, or it says recoat after 16 hours. So I'm going to leave these for probably an hour till it's touch dry. And then put them away for a bit, and sometime next week they'll have enough coats of paint on them that there'll be a nice job, and it's not going to fall off, and we're not going to get runs, things like that. And this should give us a nice pleasing matte black, which is going to look good with the brass, I think. So I've used this, which is probably an Australian product, Potbelly Black we call it here, which is a stove enamel, heat resistant, self-priming. It seems to be pretty good stuff. I've painted other engines with it, and they've been hot a lot of times, and there's been no problems with them. Anyway, time to let some paint dry. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Patreon, thanks so much to everyone who, even if you're pledging $1, you're making this sort of thing possible. You're giving me the impetus to get in and get jobs like this finished and make projects like this, and that's really awesome. If you're pledging more than that, well, I thank you for your generosity, and that's an amazing thing. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for subscribing, and click the like button. Share this if you want to, if you like what you see. Really appreciate that, and be kind to each other.